Well, my name is Brian Taylor, and I want to welcome everyone to the first event fully sponsored by Forest, which is a new organization here at the University of Florida, and it stands for the Florida Organization on Religion, Environmental Science, and Technology. We hope that it will become something of an institution around here where we can facilitate critical thinking and critical engagement on issues related to religion, science, and the environment in the coming years. I'm delighted to see so many community people here because we certainly want this organization to not just be here on campus, but to be engaged not only in the Gainesville community and in the region. If you want to keep track of what's happening with Forest, you can go to religionandnature.com, just www, all one word, religionandnature.com, and not only that project, but a number of others you can see there. If you go to Forest and click on that, you see tonight the announcement for our guests. And we'll try to keep everyone posted there. You can also click the URL to write to us and make sure that you get on our email list so that you are kept informed of other things that are happening here. Forest was started by a group of graduate students and faculty in the program in Religion and Nature, which is housed in the Department of Religion here at the University of Florida. We hope to have a variety of interesting and innovative programs related to that effort as well going forward. We thought that it would be very appropriate to start with the current speaker tonight, who is John Zerzan, who many of you know as one of the primary theorists of Green Anarchy in the United States. I want to talk, I'm going to introduce you in a minute to our Chief Administrator for Forest, who will say a couple things also about why John's here, but I want to give you a sense of what we were talking about when we concocted this idea. Radical thought has not been particularly comfortable with religion, I think it's fair to say. If we look at the roots of radical thought, be it leftist or anarchist in its various forms, the tendency has been to view religion as something of an opium for the people, masking social realities and inequalities and reifying or reinforcing social hierarchies. And anarchism has certainly been a part of that radical tradition, not looking too kindly at religion. Indeed, you might say that in significant ways, anarchist social philosophy emerged in direct reaction to religion and opposition to it, and the hierarchies that its theorists believed to be precipitated by it. I've noticed in tracking radical environmental movements, however, that there's a very different and growing sympathy for at least certain types of spiritualities and certain types of religions in radical environmental circles generally, as well as in anarchist subcultures in particular. This is really quite striking, and I found it not only here in the United States, but increasingly in the international spheres as well. So in talking with John about this, I think it's also fair to say that his own thinking has involved an opening to thinking positively about the role of spirituality or religion, and he's going to, as well as kind of introducing his thinking tonight, he's going to attend to that dimension of the social movements of which he is a part. So that's a little bit on this particular speech. And then I want to introduce you to Sam Snyder, one of the graduate students in the Religion and Nature program here. We'll tell you a little bit about Forest and anything else he wants to before we get started. Oh, I'm sorry, one other thing. After John makes the presentation, we have Katrina Schwartz here from the Political Science Department who will kind of kickstart the conversation with a few comments, and then we'll open it up, and I'll try to make sure that every voice that wants in gets in. Okay? All right.
First, I want to thank all of you for coming to this first event. I'm very excited to see that I sent out flyers by email and passed them around, and they seem to have made it into other spheres by other hands in the community. It's pretty exciting to see word spreading like that, especially for this event. And hopefully this will continue for other events that we are doing with Forest. And so I guess it's my great pleasure to introduce John Zerzan, the anarchist theorist and philosopher and activist, the editor of the journal Green Anarchy. His works and theories have been very influential in both the anarchist movement as well as in radical environmentalism. And he's going to speak tonight on spirituality and green anarchy.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real honor to be here. It's to be the first person to make some remarks to the forest. You know, the philosopher part I'm never comfortable with because it seems like the general, the meaning of that is thinking at its most general. I think the lot escapes that sort of thinking, and a lot of problems arise, and I think the spiritual is usually avoided there all too much. Well, anyway, I thought I'd make a few comments, and I hope this isn't too oblique as far as this topic of the spiritual. It may be, but I find that I'm moving more in that direction, and it's curious to me. I'm just trying to make my way along there. Well, let me start with a sort of question that probably sounds pretty skeptical, but isn't necessarily. So it kind of has to do with some of the work I've been doing, which is pretty speculative in terms of origins type stuff, but some of the anthropology is available to us and some of it isn't. But mainly, if we see things like myth and ritual and religion entering the story at times in the story in our past, and seemingly corresponding with losing certain things, perhaps losing the beginnings of inequality, the beginning of rupture with what might have been more of a communion or an intimacy with nature in a way that is hard for us to even imagine, possibly, then the other side of that is, would we need these things, or hopefully will we need these things in a healed world? To me, that's an open question, and defining religion and the spiritual goes down that path. And I mean, it does, to me, at this point, have a lot to do with what we have lost, what has slipped away, and what we try to compensate for or console ourselves with. The directness is something, of course, that's being evacuated by the minute as things become more disembodied in the technoculture, become more empty and ugly and standardized and everything else. And we do need the spiritual, and how that all fits is a very fascinating question that I'm more and more interested in. An observation that one of the things that brings this to me via a sort of more political route. Very recently, I was in Italy in the fall, and coincidentally there was a little bit of a tour involving Gary Snyder and myself. That's a kind of, I don't know, odd and serendipity in terms of religion or the spiritual. We didn't speak, we were not even in the same places most of the time, but this was a little thing sponsored by a kind of alternative press who's translating some of his stuff and some of mine. Anyway, I'd been in Italy 2 years before that, in a tour which was very different. The earlier one was all political venues, all political stops, anarchist ones, around Italy with a friend of mine, and this one wasn't. This one was less political. It was in some cases it was people who were more farmers and students and feminists, and I mean, not that those people can't be anarchists, but you know, it was not such a specifically, explicitly political deal. And I really began to notice that it seems like there's a lot more openness here and on something that may be called spiritual alliance to to the anti-civilization type perspectives. And so I was thinking, well, maybe the political is not the real dimension that's operative or interesting, and that maybe we need to do a kind of flanking movement and to connect with people sort of despite the political. And anyway, that's all just another set of questions. But I was rereading some Spengler last year, the Decline of the West, Man and Techniques, and that sort of thing. And it's interesting that, well, this is now we're getting a little bit further away from the spiritual, and of course Spengler was a horrid person of the right. He firmly upheld hierarchy and militarism, nationalism, and it's a wonder he didn't get along with the Nazis. But anyway, he said that civilization is on a collision course, Faustian civilization called it, with the natural world, and the inevitable outcome will be nature is just going to be converted to a graveyard. There's just no doubt about it. And he was hardly an ecologist but it's, you can find people who already figured this out, what's going on, and now, 75 years later, since the citation I'm thinking of anyway, it's certainly true. It's certainly speeding up as well. And I ran across another thing that he said that I think is somewhat pertinent here. He said, people no longer fight about political ideas. They no longer inspire people because civilization is complete. And I'm paraphrasing here a little bit. Sure, there are issues, there are important issues, but really, you already have the answers. You already have the completed deal. So you can't really rouse people that way. And I think he was kind of referring to the left, get this place cause and so forth. Already, he felt that was already dead, only going to get deader. And I think that's true too. Unless you don't problematize civilization. If you accept that, then it's a dead end. And I think where we're at, or kind of assuming we all share perhaps some interest in resisting the dominant directions and realities, well, that's fairly descriptive. I mean, people, you can say, you don't like the right, well, what about the left? Well, the left has failed monumentally. I think that's inescapable. It's so we're stuck. And I think really what's going on is, and I've heard this in so many places, and it's just an open question. Or not an open question so much as the statement you hear, I don't know what's needed, but something different is needed. And you tell me what it is. This ain't going to work. There's no real options. I think I'd say the left exists as a vehicle for protest, even where it takes power in a certain way in, say, South America, as at the moment there's a bunch of leftist governments there, but and as a protest to free market capitalism in the world system, not much more than that. I don't know how many people there. There seems to be no other option, but there's not much juice there. There's not much real hope, or it doesn't seem that it's not really a goal that people are excited about. I don't think those days are kind of over. So anyway, I kind of get back to that press, but I thought I'd just kind of briefly introduce the Green Anarchy or anti-civilization thing, also called Primitivism, anarcho-primitivism. Some native folks we know call it neo-primitivism. It's maybe even other terms too, but it's generally the kind of arrival of, this whole thing is bringing people for various reasons to a refusal of civilization and some of its most essential fundamental institutions. And I thought of 4 reasons, maybe there are more, and perhaps most people share all of these 4 to a very matter of emphasis here. Why people would come to this point of view might be kind of interesting as an intro type of thing. We could say, for one thing, that kind of individual or personal reaction. Civilization stands in the way of freedom and wholeness and so forth. Maybe thinking of Freud and civilization and its discontents. I think this is relevant. It's the point of view that the more civilization you get, the more neurosis you get, until you get the universality of civilization, everybody's neurotic. And that too seems to have become pretty true. In fact, people might say that's putting it mildly. And actually, the so-called Unabomber Manifesto, Industrial Society in its Future, which is, I read that as a psychology, really. And that's, in a nutshell, I think it essentially says the more technology you have, the less freedom and the less fulfillment the individual has. And I think actually he demonstrates that very effectively. Just takes you through the steps, and that's true. I think it's unmistakably true. You can just feel that, the kind of emptiness and so on. Well, another reason is I think some people have noticed or concluded that civilization and patriarchy are pretty much equivalent. That the systematic reduction of women and the male-defined culture, the objectification, these things really are established with domestication. And I want to sort of qualify the use of civilization, because I think more precisely it's domestication which immediately precedes civilization, that will to control and dominate, moving from, as Daniel Quinn, among others, puts it in a popular idiom, instead of taking what nature gives, you remodel and re-engineer and wrest from nature what you want and stand over it. Another one is, I think another course to get to the same conclusion is, and this was very instrumental in my path, one of the things, is what I discovered rather accidentally in the 1980s, namely what is perhaps still called the new paradigm in terms of what we know. And there have been modifications to this. I'm just going to say this in the most general terms, but life outside of civilization or prior to civilization, I think has some inspiring lessons and things to meditate on. The idea of, well, some of these traits, which were not brand new. I'm not saying that in recent decades there's been an entire wholesale shift. It's more of a shift of emphasis. But it involves such characteristics as sharing, as a common ethos of gather, hunter life, forager life, band society. These are words for pre-civilized social existence. That's rather well known. Food sharing. The amount of leisure time, which is of course a modern term. They didn't separate work from leisure because work hadn't been invented, but the amount of effort and time that it took for sustenance was rather small in general, with rather few number of hours per day. Pretty much a considerable autonomy for women in pre-civilized, pre-domesticated lifeways. No evidence of organized violence, warfare, no destruction of the earth. And we were talking about some of this before in a different vein to some degree. 2 or 3 million years of not destroying the earth, and we've been doing pretty fantastically, especially in just the past, how many years we could pick. It's just a frightening speeded up development. And I think it used to be thought, for example, that, well, people were just, until fairly recently, pretty dim. They couldn't even figure out how to mess it up or create complex society, stratified, coming up with all the features of civilization. But that's certainly not true, and I don't think anyone argues really probably about 2 million years ago, our ancestors had an intelligence equal to ours, which isn't the same as consciousness. I mean, there's a whole other bunch of questions that come up, certainly, but you know, people were cooking with fire about 2 million years ago. People were traveling on the open seas 800,000 years ago and so forth. Whereas domestication is only about 10,000 years old. And that, of course, the logic of that, the trajectory of that, whatever you want to call it, has been very destabilized and a matter of disequilibrium, to put it mildly. And it's changed all that. So, I mean, people used to say, why did people take so long to figure out agriculture, to figure out domestication? And actually, in the textbooks now, I've seen 2 of them. The question is, why did they ever do it, given the resultant set of stuff, all the negative changes? People used to think, for example, and I'm not going to go on and on about this, but population pressure. Well, you get more and more people, you've got to switch to a mode of production, if you want to call it that, that'll feed you. It's inevitable, it's natural, but that isn't true. The population takeoff didn't happen until you have domestication. So that's, in fact, even on the face of it, it's not when people are having a hard time and you have the leisure to think about planning and waiting and experimenting. You don't have time for it or space for it in that sense. Well, and then I could introduce, or could mention another reason, which is probably more pressing and obvious of all, why people would come to question or even condemn civilization, and that is the crisis of today. I mean, can we stick with this? Is it working? Can we just keep going along? Well, it's pretty obvious that the answer to that is no. So, which, more questions are opened up with that. But also, how do we account for the crisis, the depth of the crisis, the fact that it's really happening in every sphere? The ecocide is obvious, and I don't need to go down a list of stuff. I mean, there's any number of things we could dwell on that are completely going south. The accelerating extinction of species, the polar caps are melting, and Derek Jensen's, and in fact I saw some science today, right out there was, we know all these things. In fact, people that just open a newspaper once in a while, actually it's available, it's just there. It's global warming and the rainforests and everything. It's just, or as Derek Jensen says, there's no body of water on this planet anymore that isn't contaminated, and there's no mother's milk that doesn't have carcinogens, and all that. And we can see, so that's outer nature, and then as far as inner nature goes, well, the point Freud made, and it's one interesting, frightening thing. It's in the past 5-6 years, there have been more than 1 or 2 studies from the UK and the US about pollution of drinking water. The groundwater has a lot of pharmaceuticals in it, and so that's, which are not screened out by water treatment. So there you've got the problem of the environment and the problem of inner nature, if you will, demonstrating the connection in another horrible way. So, and this, I think something even more, rather than a laundry list of things and examples, or too many of them, the tsunami disaster at the end of 2004 in South Asia, there it is in many respects, the fruits of industrialization for one thing. You take away the mangrove stands, you destroy the coral reefs through pollution and other means, you flatten the sand dunes, guess what? It magnifies the devastation. And by the way, I'm not saying that tsunami was caused by civilization or anything, obviously not, but the point, another point is that, which is even more interesting to me than the other, and more striking, I'd say probably 2, although it's one that doesn't want to minimize the horrendous loss of life in any respect, but the people that died were domesticated animals and domesticated humans. People who didn't die, no non-domesticated animals or non-domesticated humans died. There you go. And that was, and now there's a huge amount of, this was first reported, I think, on the BBC, and pretty striking. I was in Berlin in January as part of a documentary film sort of thing, and there was a professor, and I didn't bring it up, somebody else was talking about it as we were getting ready for this sort of panel thing, and he said, you know, that's just National Enquirer stuff. That's just urban legend kind of stuff. So, you know, and you don't have to go to Berlin to find denial. I mean, you don't want to see what that tells us. I mean, not that that turns everybody into instant primitivists or something, but, you know, that's just another question, isn't it? What is it that, and it turns out this guy's a leftist, which is one of my pet obsessions, I guess, but, you know, that doesn't enter the equation. That can't be true. That I don't want to hear about. So how are they different from, if we feel superior to the consumers at the mall who maybe turn on Rush Limbaugh to fill our heads with more denial about the nature of things, this guy has got just as much denial, it seems to me. Yeah, and the other side of the coin in terms of the spiritual, in terms of what is being drained away, however you want to put it, that's to me even perhaps at least as frightening, the massive dehumanization or alienation. And at the same time, we were just talking about postmodernism. You know, in the last 20 years, I was noticing this, I think an interesting little article possibly. If you look in the indices of different books in the fields, the social sciences and so on, unless something's changed in the last couple of years, the word alienation isn't there anymore. And it reminds me of what Sir Anthony Giddens said about capitalism, and he's not a Marxist or anything. He said, isn't it strange that now there's nothing but capitalism, but nobody studies it as a system or anything else? It doesn't, you look it up, where's capitalism? I mean, they're both universal, but it's like, it's sort of like we've thrown in the towel. We just accept all that. Or you could say that's another way to describe postmodernism. Or the drug dependence. This is just amazing. Also, I believe. And just for a second, legal drugs. The dependence on drug technology now is suddenly, well, you know, it used to be normal human function, I think, to be able to relax, to be able to sleep, to be able to not be debilitated by stress, anxiety, depression, for males to have sexual function. Well, now, there are millions of people who need those things, who need drugs, that is, for those functions. And, you know, and they're going to need those drugs from now on. I think it's probably safe to say. It's like school shootings. Anybody think that's going away? Anybody think anybody has any intelligent reaction to that? Certainly not on the left, and nowhere else, I don't think. So, kids as young as 2 on these heavy antidepressants. What kind of society do we have? And it didn't get here overnight, but now there's many things you could say about it. I mean, there's a deep spiritual need. And again, I think these things are very deep-seated. They're the mainsprings of this, that's brought us to this, I think goes very, very deep. And you, as Adorno said, in a slightly different respect, if you're looking for the factors in society for the causes of horrible things, you should look for society. Society is the reason, not this or that thing in society. It's what it is. It produces this. And you know, it gets deep. The plot thickens or deepens when you think about how apparently the more developed or advanced societies become, the more these things are endemic. You can decide whether that's determinism or what it is, but it's true. I mean, You don't have, not that there are not other problems and other stages of development, if you like to call it that, but well, anyway, these are some reasons I think for a kind of green anarchy position. It takes so many different forms too, I think. And meanwhile, Foucault said human relations are now inescapably technologized. We have a technoculture. We just, that's the way it is. We might as well forget about it. Or what Frederick Jameson said, postmodernism is what you have when the modernization process is complete and nature is gone for good. Some of you probably know that line. Gee, I don't feel like accepting that, really. I don't. And so how do you get outside of that, or how do you refute it, or where do you go? You can say, no, that's not true. But it is true. I mean, if you accept all the givens. And anyway, I think all of us took for granted a lot of very fundamental institutions, maybe starting with specialization or division of labor. And because it's just, well, you can't have modernity without division of labor. Well, if modernity or mass society is the problem, then it's time to rethink that. It's time to look at what that is. Marx actually started out on that, but it proved a little too difficult. And what is a lot, not to say it's a walk in the park, but it's rather more simple in various ways to make the problem, and this is generalizing here or putting this kind of crudely, but to make the problem which class controls the means of production rather than thinking about what is production, what does it do to people, how does it divide the individual and lead to divided society, division of labor. So we kind of abandon that. When I think of things like, but this is a striking one from a few weeks ago in the New York Times, Vivian. I don't know if anyone has read about Vivian. There's a big story. Vivian is a software thing. It's a virtual girlfriend. No unpleasant, possibly difficult human relations. And I'm not saying everybody tomorrow Vivian will be the model of everything, but that's part of the direction. Or also in the New York Times a few months ago, there was a picture of an elderly woman in some kind of contraption that kind of looked like a coffin with a window for her face. It turns out she was in a nursing home in Japan, as it happens, and this is a washing machine. You push the button, and so no human touch. There's no, you're not bathing this person. You just stick them in a machine, push the button. So, what is the inner logic that gets us to this kind of horrifying dehumanization, as well as the systematic destruction of the planet? That's really the kind of questions that we're motivated by, you might say. And maybe I'll just kind of wind this up with just a few words about technology, just to maybe focus a little more on this. And that whole thing, which is also anathema to an awful lot of sectors who claim that they're in opposition in some way to society. For example, the claims that are made, you still see it in ads and so on. I mean, you in the past 20 years, lots of this kind of thing. Technology connects us, technology empowers us, the computer, you know what I mean, and gives us all this richness of access to variety and all this sort of thing. Well, actually, those things are completely false. I mean, in the midst of all this onrushing technology, I think it's safe to say that people have never felt more isolated, more disempowered. And to quote Jameson again, paraphrase Jameson, we live in the most standardized society that's ever existed. So, or another thing, an even more basic claim is that technology is just simply a neutral quantum of some kind. It just depends on what you do with it. I don't know what you do with Vivian or the machine that washes old people. I don't know who. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me who's in charge of that. It's just evil, and it's just ridiculous. It's not. Anyway, I think that the idea that technology is neutral isn't true, and it probably has never been true. In fact, it's the way a society is a reality. It's the physical incarnation, if you will, of any society. It's inseparable from that, because embedded in there is our moral values, moral choices. I mean, now what it says, what it has, what it embodies is things like distancing and disembodiment, coldness, a lot of things. I mean, it's just I think you can see that, as opposed to tools, of which there used to be quite a lot, which did involve division of labor or modern systems, bureaucratic systems for their existence. I mean, these things are choices. If we want closeness, if we want substance, if we want some kind of real connection, face-to-face community, you don't get it with this technology. You just don't. You're taken it away from it. But of course, now we're told, oh, you can have virtual community. It's just as good. And I guess Vivian is just as good too. You know, it's just really, it's that insane, and it's getting there even. You know, you say this over and over again. Excuse me, but it's really just rapidly arriving and evacuating. And I think that's why there's more of a sense of the need for a connection which we can call spiritual. I also tend to feel myself just that it's more of, it has to do with directness, it has to do with an immediacy, a real connection, a face-to-face connection with people of perhaps like band society, the original anarchy that some people call it that, term it that. When you got like 60 people and you're responsible for yourself and each other, and there is no, it's not mass society. That's kind of obvious. This is the kind of choice. This is the choice of paradigms. We have the paradigm of division of labor, domestication, civilization, technology, progress, industrialization, modernity, mass society, mass production, mass consumption of culture, and everything else, virtuality. And Paul Shepard said that the step, for example, the step to nanotechnology and genetic engineering and human cloning is there in the first step. It's implicit in the first step, the move to domestication, the move to domination. And as an anarchist, I think it's very sensible to, if anarchy means identifying and refusing domination, well, that's the biggest, I would guess, the biggest domination there is, and the thing that turns everything, the hinge, the axial point that has turned us in a different direction you know, here it is. I mean, how much more of this do we want? And so, anyway, I'm afraid this doesn't have much very, very directly about spirituality or how to define that. But I see that people in various ways, on different levels, if you will, are getting that this is a profound crisis, and the spiritual has been reached away with so many other things that are being reached away, the whole texture of life and connection. But well, I guess I'll just kind of wind up there. And I just want to say, maybe this is a horribly bleak little deal here, but I'm really pretty hopeful, because for one thing, I mean, well, in terms of the GA thing, the anti-civilization thing, or the primitivist thing, it's starting to show up all over the place. I'm not saying it's a big mass deal any place, it isn't, but there's interest in it in India, China, Ukraine, and it's in the air. I was talking to a Bulgarian fellow last night in Tampa, and he was saying, it is out there, and it's starting to become some kind of a current, and it certainly has to involve spiritual. And maybe you all can help me with what that means. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Oh, and by the way, I found this, we were talking, this says it too. This is from a group in Pennsylvania, the Coalition Against Civilization. Can you see it says Born Again Predator?
Where did you find that? Just here someplace?
It was in this, it was tucked in my thing here, and it kind of fell out.
Well, let's get Katrina to get us started. Started here, and then we'll all jump in.
Okay, well, thanks so much for the very thought-provoking comments. I think this idea of reality being replaced by virtual reality is something that we can feel here in Florida perhaps better than anywhere else. A place where most of the valuable real estate is on land that's not even land, that was created by people within the last 100 years. When I was reading some of your stuff on the internet this morning, I thought about this place south of here called Discovery Cove. Has anybody been there? I think that's what it's called. It's like a Disney kind of theme park. I haven't been there. My friend went with her sister and her family, and it's a place. The idea is that you get to go swim with dolphins, which should be kind of some kind of regaining an immediate connection with nature. But the whole thing is, of course, massively overproduced and micromanaged, and you end up, you go through this whole sort of very standardized sort of assembly line process, and then you get your 5 minutes in this swimming pool with the dolphins, and each kid gets to hold on to the dolphin for a 45-second ride with the dolphin. The whole thing is being videotaped, and there's videographers and there's still photographers, and then you spend about 5 minutes in the pool, and then my friend said you spend about 45 minutes immediately after that in a place where they're selling you the different products in terms of video and photographs. So the whole thing is about having the images, the symbols of this experience. And when they got back, I had to sit there and watch the video with her sister and the kids. And they had just been there that day, but then it was more important almost to watch the video of it than to actually be there. So, and I think Florida is really chock full of this kind of virtual nature experiences, and tremendous alienation from nature itself. When I teach environmental politics here, and I always ask my students how many, for example, have been in the Everglades without a human or something, and the vast majority of students who born and raised in Florida haven't been there, except for maybe a school field trip to go to the Indian reservation. So all of that, rings very deeply true and is very tragic. I do think that lots of people are writing about these things, not necessarily from an anarchist perspective. I think people do write and talk all the time about alienation, so I want to disagree with you a little bit on that. Maybe not using the same words, but certainly people are talking about it, thinking about it. I would disagree with Anthony Giddens that people aren't writing about capitalism as a system. I think that's what whole disciplines are doing in political economy and geography and so forth. And I think a lot of people on what we could call the left of the spectrum, on the progressive end, would agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I guess where the difference comes in is some of your more radical ideas about none of these problems can be tackled without moving away from civilization itself, including language, number, art, everything that we would think of as related to consciousness, ideas, ideologies. And for me, I mean, this is all new to me. I haven't, I spent my whole career studying states and ideologies and not the absence thereof. But I find that I don't know what to do with that idea. First of all, and I'm sure this is the question we get all the time, I'd like to ask the question of, how does this translate into action plans for, if we want to, fight power, if we want to work towards a less stable world. And if, say, we wanted to go as far as you want to go and say we want to move against civilization, how would you possibly do that? Even if we agree that language and culture were the fruit of the tree of knowledge that poisoned our existence forever, it seems that once you have language and culture and art, you can't ever go back. You can't. Once you have civilization, I can't really imagine how we would get away from it even if we wanted to. And secondly, it seems to me that by saying that we can't, that unless we're rejecting civilization in general, we're in denial. It seems to me that then you're unable to grapple with differences, the profound differences between different types of societies and different types of ideologies. And the fact that there is a tremendous variation in terms of the level of brutality against nature, brutality of people against each other, that are produced in different types of societies. Civilization is not the same everywhere. Capitalism is not the same everywhere. So capitalist civilization in Denmark is a whole lot different than capitalist civilization in the United States today. So how do you, and it seems to me that by your line of thinking, we have to reject ideologies and ideas in general. And so how do we distinguish between some more fruitful and less fruitful ones? And we can't use ideology as our guide to get to a better world than how we do it. Maybe I'll leave it at that.
Well, I was afraid you'd bring in the critique of symbolic culture, which I avoided, and we don't know any surviving other people that don't have language and so on. But and I totally agree. There are really important differences among different cultures. I would contend there's really only one civilization now. When I was in Turkey a while ago, there were something like 400 or 500 civilizations, mostly very early on in the game, and we don't know much about most of them. But anyway, now there's only one, I think, in the world, even though there are important differences. The direction is clear. Anyway, I don't know. I think the biggest question, and it's really still very largely unanswered, is what does this mean in terms of apolitics or anti-politics, whatever you want to call it. And that's a pretty open question. I mean, people are doing different things, but it's just a mammoth kind of thing to begin to approach that. I mean, there are people who are trying to work out some alternatives on the land. There's some, like the wild goods people in North Carolina, and I don't know so much about that, but there are different groups that are trying to experience life which is not dependent on these different structures, or as far as they can, and try to figure out or pursue things like permaculture or the Fukuoka method, or whatever it might be, in terms of how to survive. Where does the food come from? And although we could say that this is a bizarre way to feed people now, where our food comes on average 1,500 miles, and it no longer has any taste and not much nutrients, and so on and so on. But where it would be seemingly much more logical and simple if it grew right in front of us. were allowed to just, what are the native edible plants? How did people used to live? And start reconnecting with that. And earth skills, you know, this primitive skills thing is a bit of a fad, but some of it does connect with the social critique or direction. Some of it, I think, is just simply, and this is kind of more my thing, is just trying to contribute to starting a dialogue. You know, where do we begin to talk about these things? Because there's no solution unless, you know, huge numbers of people are involved. It's just a little game. Otherwise, you know, if people are not interested in confronting these things and thinking about all the things that are being done that shouldn't be done, and you know, trying to figure out how we go in a different direction, and maybe much more decentralized direction, and all these different things, which no one would assert could happen overnight, but as a transitional type thing, would vary a lot depending on where you are and so on. But and that's one of the things that's kind of frustrating. By the way, there was a fellow in Temple last night who said, "Well, everybody knows this stuff. You just need to say what are the practical things." And I'm not you know, conflating that thing with what you said, but that's not the point. But and this was somebody on the left, by the way. And I said, where can you think of somebody who's trying to contend with these things? Even one person, anywhere, in terms of what I would call the left, anyway. I mean, this is a very open secret or public secret that these, as you said, you know, I think that is more accurate to say. Yeah, how can you not talk about things like this? But where are certain things being questioned, certain fundamental social institutions, which we do accept or used to all accept, and he had no answer, as if, oh well, we're all doing that, but you don't know where to go or anything. But we're not all doing that. It hasn't even begun. There's, you know, really, not as a quote political thing, not by anybody, not even the Greens or even Nader or whoever it is. It just isn't. So I think the first thing is one of the first things is the dialogue. Let's put it on the table. This is unworkable. This ain't gonna. We ain't gonna survive this. If you think about your children, what are they gonna have? More of what you're describing. More plastic, staged life. As Debord said, life is disappearing into its representation. We'll just be watching it on the screen and taking drugs to keep sort of sane to get through the day. I mean, you know, that's not science fiction. Anyway, I think that there are a lot of different things that people can do to try to, you know, take some of these things seriously and see what is their contribution to challenging it. This is not inevitable. It's not natural, and it's not working. So let's start to face it. And that's not much of an answer, I admit, but you know, you have to go for it, I think, and just see where it goes. See if we can figure it out, and see if anybody's interested. You know, as miserable as people seem to be getting, immiseration, you can put it that way. Yet Bush is president. You know, it's clear. I mean, you know, which could be a whole different discussion about values and spiritual and so forth from a different angle. You hear that, you know, thrown around as a cliche all the time. But anyway, I don't know if that's much of an answer or not.
Just start out here. Today, I just harvested like 40 pounds of vegetables from my garden, and I'm going to go and have potluck and feed a lot of my friends. And I'm thinking that feels very natural to me, and it feels very workable, and it also doesn't feel like I'm incredibly domesticated by it. I mean, where do people who think like me fit into this Green Anarchy?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, the people that are experimenting with horticulture and stuff and doing what you're doing is, you know, it's again, it would be some kind of transitional thing. At least that's one way to look at it. Not some overnight deal. I mean, we don't know how to you know how to grow things, most people don't, and you know, that's kind of a beginning of, did you notice that what grows here, you know that, you're successful at it, and that's part of the move away from the supermarket and the massification, the monoculture, and all that. And you know, I wouldn't be surprised to find out you would like to go further with that. And so, yeah, there's no magic wand. They like to leap over all these things, and we're all part of it. We're certainly all implicated in reproducing it and everything, no matter what our ideas are. But we got to start these practical things. And was it you up?
Yeah, on that note, but it was nice to hear you speak. Thanks. Thanks for coming.
This is more of a comment, kind of two-part comment on what you're asking before about starting to change the time and take back your life. I found that mass production causes a lot of alienation in life, whereas once we had to go out and grow food together or hunt and gather food together and build shelters in communities. Now it's more, you have to go to an 8-hour day, 10-hour day, how many hours a day type job, and you can just pay for your shelter and pay for your food at the grocery store, and it severs a lot of communal ties. And I think now that I've tried to start putting myself out of capitalism and become more self-sufficient in my life, I found that although I can do it by myself and grow my own food and maintain my own dwelling, that it's a lot easier with other people to help me out and support me in mutually beneficial relationships. And I think that connects with what you were saying about spirituality and religion. A lot of religions, commune when they go to worship, and I find a lot of deep connection with people I work with on different projects, but whether it be growing food or feeding hungry people or whatever we happen to be doing at the time. Also in a revolutionary sense, the anarchist thought, anarchism and revolution, it's going to be a change. And if you look at Taoist philosophy or pretty much any religion, they're all waiting for some type of change to happen, whether it be inside, come, or personal change, through growth, like Buddhism, or change in constant evolution. The world, through Taoism, and I think that's the way spirituality to anarchism. But on what she was saying, ways you can really start to turn the tide is, and what I've tried to do for myself is really look at my life and find out what I need and what I don't need to survive, and take it very slowly and just give up one little thing at a time. You don't have to rush. It's kind of lifestyles, I guess. But I slowly just started giving up things that I didn't need and try to consume less. And the less you're putting into that system, the more you're becoming self-returning, I guess.
Richard, understand it?
Yeah, it seems like critiques of the status quo often get framed in terms of this dichotomy of, lack of spirituality versus spirituality, and the problem is often interpreted as being somehow things that become desacralized, or, the sacred has been, eroded or forgotten or whatever. And so then, of course, the answer is to his analysis. But he so successfully analyzes the ideology of market capitalism as a faith system, as a religion, in all its operative senses, in all its meaningful senses, that he makes it quite clear that there's spirituality there, and once you're sort of attuned to that, I think you see it everywhere. I mean, a few years ago I saw this big billboard off the Bruckner Expressway in the Bronx with just this, this SUV out there in nature and everything, and then just this one word, heaven. I mean, it's not very subtle. And then I was in O'Hare Airport last September, and I saw that Range Rover has basically plagiarized that ad. Now they have the same ad, except it's a Range Rover. And it just says heaven. So spirituality is there, when you start to see the shopping mall as a church, even on a Sunday morning, and you see how many people are in the mall, that's fulfillment. They're after spiritual fulfillment, because the system teaches them that this is, it's the highest virtue, as Bush told us in his first speech after September 11, 2001, go out and shop, this is the #1 response. This is the best thing that Americans can do, because and that's how we prop up this faith system. If we stop believing in it and expressing our faith through spiritual practice, the system collapses, like any faith system, because there's nothing holding it up. So when you see it like that, to me anyway, it's no longer possible to talk about an absence of spirituality. It's there. You look at Nazism. It was a very spiritual movement. But it was an unhealthy spirituality, at least to me, and I feel the same way about global capitalism as an ideology. It's full of spirituality, but it's awful spirituality. It's spirituality, that's doing all kinds of harmful things. So I wonder if there's a better way, or a more, useful way to analyze ideological systems than, the sacred and the profane. If we let go of the idea, if we just say, like, okay, what if we just consider that human beings are just inherently spiritual, and that spirituality is going to, channel itself somewhere, in whatever context. So everything that humans do has a spiritual dimension to it. But is there a way that we can sort of set up the discussion productively so that we can actually act? In other words, whether, I don't know, would it be to say, yeah, that some spirituality is healthy, demonstrably so, some spirituality is demonstrably unhealthy, do we measure it by its fruits? I don't know. I just kind of want to challenge this sort of, familiar way of looking at modernity or industrialization or whatever, and the sacred, unsacred kind of thing, and ask, maybe, is there a different way that corresponds more, that better accommodates seeing things like Marxism, Nazism, or consumerism as full-blown religious systems, not just as a metaphor, not just symbolic religious systems, not civil religion, but totally like every other faith system in all categories that actually mean anything.
Well, I would say that's ramming a whole bunch of things into the bag without, frankly, I haven't read the article, but I'm sure you could make, you jumped to the obvious point that, I don't see how you can deny it that it's metaphor, that just because they say heaven, that doesn't make it a religion, and not that we're saying that exactly, but do you think people are spiritually fulfilled by shopping? That's really a stretch, it strikes me.
Well, I think that they think they're going to get spiritually fulfilled by shopping, and they might not. But I think that people might take communion thinking they're going to get spiritually fulfilled, and they might fail to get spiritually fulfilled by taking communion too.
Have you ever spoken to anyone who says they expect to be spiritually fulfilled by buying things?
Yeah, I actually have students that say stuff like that. I had a student not long ago. We were having this kind of discussion in a class, and I asked students, I think it was the first day of class, and I asked everybody, I went around the room, I asked everybody to talk about a recent spiritually fulfilling experience. And this one guy said, I was washing my car. And people laughed because they thought he was kidding, but then we realized he wasn't kidding. For him, washing his car, he felt so deeply, he so much identified with his car that washing his car was absolutely the most profound spiritual experience that he could imagine.
Well, it's a little different than buying the car. I don't know, but actually, I don't know. I guess I just feel we got to kind of be more careful with all that. My partner has said for years that anarchy is a spiritual movement, and it's not going to go further unless people accept that and see that and understand that its roots are very deep. And I'm beginning to see that more and more. That's right. I still don't totally understand that, but I'm more open to it. And it sounds right, even though I don't quite get it. But it's a little stretch. It's a bit of a stretch to the consumerism as religion is.
Well, I'll send you the article.
Okay.
curious, you said that you were hopeful, and this is actually sort of bridging off the question that I asked you earlier today about celebrating success or small successes in activism and protest and whatnot. And I guess for me, these days it's very hard to be hopeful and to find hope. You know, when you sit there and you list off that, you know, how in the midst of that, or what tools do you find that do provide hope, or sort of some sort of solace in the face of, you know, clear-cutting and destruction of rainforests and the whole thing?
I don't know. I think I'm kind of a product of the 60s, and it's a kind of psychological problem of being optimistic. I'm always derided by anarchists in Eugene for that. Like, I'm just not going to say again how everything's going to. But I don't know. I mean, to me, these things are arguments against the system, and they're pressing on people more and more. And I don't see the system as having any future or any answers. And I don't think shopping is satisfying people. And otherwise, why would we be reading more and more pathological stuff? Because everybody's shopping. I don't know how many people are happy. I mean, I see born-again Christians. They seem happy. They just seem kind of. I don't know. I don't understand that either. But I wouldn't say. Well, I don't know. It's just. I don't know why. Actually, I just think it's not as strong as they want us to think, and it just doesn't have any answers. And it is getting around. People have, even though it has no footing or recognition by any established political thing, maybe that's a very good thing. It's getting around. And this anarchy is getting around, and this is anarchy now. The old workerism, productionism, how that's self-managed factories. You know, more and more people see, well, factories are the problem, and that implies the whole ball of wax. You know, really. And again, not to make it a simple thing. Oh, wow, if that's true, we sure got a lot of work and a lot of everything else to do. But I mean, there are a lot of kids, I wonder how you all see it. I mean, it's younger, just guessing your antics, and you know, whether you have optimism or hope, or those words, maybe those aren't the right words.
I think just seeing all these people in the room sitting down and discussing the topic gives me hope that people will actually do something in the future.
But you can't just talk, you gotta go and make that change too, whether it be in your life or out of your life.
I guess even the fact that I sent this flyer out via email, and people that I didn't know printed it off, passed it around, hung it in bookstores.
All the way from St. Augustine to philosophy.
Let me exercise moderator's privilege here and pose a question. In your writings, you sometimes have talked about Van der Post, who wrote about some of the African peoples in southern Africa, about their really telepathic capacities that even crossed species barriers. And in this class we've been doing on radical environmentalism, we focused a lot on the kind of affective and even what we might call it the kind of spiritual epistemologies that animate a lot of people in the movement. And a lot of that has to do with the assumption that if you get out there in wild nature with a kind of open and alert heart, you can begin to perceive things and relationships and even develop kind of communicative capacity with beings other than humans, and that kind of connection is something that has a lot to say with the kind of passion that people bring to those movements. And I think the fact that the word connection has come out here a number of times is not by accident. If you look at the roots of the word religion, which you yourself have pointed to in some of your work, it has to do with being bound to and connected to something. And I think in some of your early work, you looked at that negatively. because you said that this has to do with the way in which you're kind of bound to an oppressive system. And yet, what I find through my own look at kind of grassroots environmental movements around the world, really, is that sense of being bound to or connected to a living natural world is really the wellspring of a spirituality. It can have supernaturalistic dimensions where the world is conceived of as being inspirited in certain ways. This is something called animism in the anthropological literature. But it can also be devoid of the supernaturalistic premises. Freeman House wrote in Totem Salmon when he said, the salmon are speaking to us if only by their disappearance. So that's kind of a small scale thing where people, in movements who are trying to reorient their way of perception to being out there in wild nature and just being alert to the little things around them. That's very small scale. It has a lot of affinity with maybe a kind of an anarchist politics in a certain way. But where I want to push it also, while mentioning that and seeing if that's a part of your kind of turn toward more receptivity to spirituality tropes or religion ideas, I think there's something going on at a bigger scale, too. We see it in things like James Lovelock's Gaia theory that conceives of the biosphere as a living organic being in a sense. But not just in the ideas of some kind of big global thinkers. We begin to see it emerging at big international venues like the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg just a little while ago, where world leaders like Kofi Annan and Thabo Mbeki from the Republic of South Africa and Jane Goodall make pilgrimages to Sterkfontein, which is where they found some of the earliest Australopithecine bones. And they talked about how this is one of the sacred places of the earth that demonstrates the emergence of humanity from Africa, and that we're all kin because we all came from the same place. And so a kinship ethic emerging there, and even from these people who are really in some ways at the pinnacle of the world system that anarchist theory wants to destroy. So I guess I find, when I was there watching some of that ritualizing there, I was kind of blown away by it, and I thought, well, there's a kind of a bizarre and perhaps hopeful sign. You have people consecrating or making sacred these stories of the evolutionary unfolding of the planet. And maybe they're not following that through, but there was associated with that an axiology or value theory that valued all life, all forms of life. That was clearly stated, if not acted on. So it wasn't acted on at that event. But at least the rhetoric was remarkable. And it struck me that it was kind of countercultural rhetoric that it had escaped its countercultural breeding grounds and was in some sense going global. So what does that have to do with politics? Well, if we're going to protect global commons like the oceans, the atmosphere, they can't all be done by these wonderful experiments in permaculture and growing your own vegetables. We're talking about big systems here. So I guess I'm wondering, when we talk about spirituality, maybe these small connections are really valuable, but what about the big connections? What about the spiritual possibilities of large systems, not just small ones? And does anarchism or green spiritual anarchism have a way of recognizing the value, potential, and importance of large systems? And that's something I struggle with when I think about how far I can go down a kind of anarchist social philosophy.
Well, I don't see the value in large systems or in any kind of bureaucratic approach. I mean, these people evidently have to acknowledge some respect for these currents, and I think that's a good thing. But as you say, it's rhetoric. They accomplish nothing whatsoever there, or maybe not nothing whatsoever, but nothing that's even slowing down the massive destruction which they preside over. So, I mean, I don't look for it within these systems. I only think that I think the promise is to end those big systems, and so there can be a connection based on autonomy and individual responsibility in groups where that is real, where that is possible, and that is face-to-face kind of thing. Maybe that's a totally far off goal, but that's a goal rather than accepting, well, we can just keep going along in some way, but we can, and I'm not saying you are, but they make these noises, that's good. Well, for whatever reason, but it doesn't validate the system. It doesn't change its nature or its logic or where it's taking us. It just doesn't. I don't see where is on what authority do they have that? On what record can they possibly stand? On what promises can they possibly make? Haven't we seen enough of that? If we can pull that down, we have a chance, but otherwise we're just floating along toward the waterfall, I think.
If I could quickly follow up though, if you look at something like the depletion of fisheries, marine fisheries, it's hard for me to get my brain around the possibility of, at least in the next couple of decades, arresting that, slowing that destructive inertia if you don't have international binding agreements to stop what is in some sense the destruction of that commons by, just tons of people who need to eat.
Well, I'm not saying I would be unhappy if those things didn't happen. Sure, I mean, if anything that gets a good result out of it, and people are doing that sort of thing, they're still under what ideological basis? If they're achieving something, that's excellent. That's terrific. It's not a cause for dismay, but that's it's hard to find, even just sort of empirically, or pragmatically, where you can find some promise of success or further success or something to build on it. There's an enormous amount of time and energy on every kind of reformist effort through all the accepted channels. And the reason why nobody's interested anymore, not nobody, but the reason why there's such a giant turnoff, measured any way you like, the majority don't bother to vote or whatever it is because it's pointless. It's a good reason. There's a good reason why they don't. That's not the only reason, I'm sure, but why should you spend all your time wasting it? Why not go for the whole thing? I'm not saying it's either or, because like I said, I think it's when there's any kind of like in where I live, we stopped a number of things right in our neighborhood. They were going to cut down all these old big leaf maples. They were going to decimate the neighborhood, the most beautiful thing about the neighborhood. And the whole neighborhood rose up and said, no, you're not. And they knew there'd be a riot. They did. And, different things like that. They tried to close this park. They put an iron fence around it, and every single lantern was torn down until they gave up and went away. I mean, that's not the end of the system, but, we're defending our thing as best we can.
I'm curious to hear how you would figure in population into some of the ideas that you're sharing today, talking about we need to become close with nature, or reconnection with nature. But if that were to happen today, I think that would further decimate any sort of, whatever we've managed to protect thus far, that would just be the end of it. And for example, I believe it was you saying it was a shame that some people who've grown up in Florida haven't been to the Everglades, but part of me is happy. I don't want all these people going to the Everglades. That would be a horrible thing. So how do you, it seems to me right now that the population that we're at, or the population that we're going to be, even more so, would be a huge obstacle to attaining some of these goals. What would you speak to that? And maybe a follow-up on that is all these people, this population, this is a step away from this question, but what do you do with the people that do like this plastic society? What do you tell them? The people who do like the Vivians, who do like their 5-minute swims with the dolphins, what do you tell them?
Well, that's kind of the answer to your first question. They're not all going to go to the Everglades because they'll be busy with their plastic Vivian or something. I mean, but in other words, people are not going to just all swarm out there. Everybody just demand everything and run out into the woods. But you know, that's not the way it's likely to happen. But the thing about population, if population is more of an effect than a cause, as it seems to have been at the start, then that effect changes when the cause changes. In other words, you take away what drives it, then it goes down. And it wouldn't go down overnight either, of course. You know, there's not going to be, one hopes, some big die-off. Well, if 6.5 billion, most of them should die, and tomorrow we'll be better off. You know? But it does go the other way. I think it, or at least there are grounds to think it would go maybe fairly rapidly the other way. You know, in some places it is going down. And, anyway, that's this. Yeah, it you know, involves some very difficult transitional things where, and some people, yeah, we can find all kinds of people that say, well, what's wrong with whatever you could think of, any synthetic, artificial, mediated device or anything else. It's, but what else you got is kind of the question. I mean, I don't know, it's just, it's confusing. I mean, why do they want to do that? I mean, some things have been closed off pretty well for most people. You know, like you said, you're just going out, people are being worked to death, both parties in a family, a nuclear family, you got to work all the time and they're wiped out. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people settle for, I mean, when I worked all the time, that's about all I was good for, is turning on TV, drinking some beer, and like anybody else. I mean, I was exhausted. And, you know, there are realities like that, but if you can somehow move away from that, then you get a different thing. You get different energy and different, you get time, and you begin to think and notice things. And that's really, in terms of the industrialism thing, like we were talking about before, the coming of the factory system, where this isn't the whole motivation or the reason for industrialization, but when you got people scattered in the countryside, riding fairly often over, say, in the 16th century, 17th centuries in England, for example. Well, if you can herd them into the factory and work them 14 hours a day, they're not going to be riding anymore. And strangely enough, Marx missed that. You know, he thought they were going to make a revolution, but it was actually the more independent craftspeople that were more likely to have the autonomy and the energy to do it. Anyway, I'm going far afield.
We have time for one more question before our official session, and so it's my Ingrid. Yes?
How would Green Anarchy apply to environmental restoration? Would it apply at all? Is there a position on like saving the Everglades? What would you do?
Well, there are people in my locale who do that. Actually have small, they are funded, in fact, to do that, to identify the native plants, and that, I guess can be somewhat tricky, you know, but to get rid of invasive species that are choking out the native plants, and working on that, trying to be in touch with the indigenous knowledge about all that. You know, what was it? You know, when they're still indigenous people. And Green Anarchy tries to connect with them, by the way, in different ways, in terms of their struggles and in terms of their wisdom. But yeah, for sure, that's something that people do. I mean, we've got to survive, and that's one job that some people have actually in the gene that I know would do that work.
Well, I know that this being as close as it is to finals for those engaged in such activities, we should close reasonably close to on time, so you can go in half about those or whatever else you do to get ready for them. So let's all thank John Zerzan for being here. I'm sure some of you have burning questions you didn't get a chance to issue or were too shy to in the bigger group that John would be happy to speak with you afterward.
Thank you for
I have a question too.
By the way,
CNET, Southeast Anarchist Network, is having their annual conference in Charleston, South Carolina. So if any of y'all are free and want to go on a little road trip, Wilder's presentation, Feral Visions, and a few other people. Also, I have some free materials available from Primitivism. Not my band, I'm part of the Cross the Street, Big Black Band.